Hello and welcome all back to Election Time News America. Today is Wednesday, July 30th, 2025. And we're going to be looking at 2028, the presidential map. Now, it is still a while away, but there's still a lot that we can get out of it and things that we could potentially look at. So, first off, we have quite a bit of Kalshi things to look at, as well as current statistics for the polling for direction of the country and approval ratings, and basing it off of previous results and more. Election Time News, your one stop for all things elections and politics, from summations to poll reviews and news. Subscribe below for more content like this about American, Canadian, and Australian elections. I will actually get to the Australian Tasmanian results in a bit, but they are still not done yet. They still have two seats in doubt, so I'm just waiting for those. They're only at 90% counted, but I'm mainly just waiting for the two seats in doubt. I want to have that down before we get to the actual numbers here. We're not 100% sure who is going to be here in that seat in Lions, as well as that seat in Bass. So we're going to wait for those before I make a video on it, but the rest is relatively decided. Also, make sure to follow the Substack, Threads, Instagram, and X. I'm active all of there. Get posts for news and stuff like that. Remember, there's never a dull moment in politics. So now into the video, we have here the map with the electoral vote counts for each state. And we're actually going to go through each and every individual state, even if they're not necessarily that competitive. There's always interesting things you can point out. SVG is a bit misdrawn. Anyway, so let's go ahead and poll closing order to start things off. We're going to start off with Indiana. Basically, it doesn't matter who ends up winning. Unless you go back, Indiana is a relatively strong Republican state. Donald Trump won it at his worst by only 16.1 in 2020. He actually won it by his most, 19.2 in 2016. He did 0.2% worse in 2024, but still, 16 points is a strong margin there. But it wasn't always that very, very red. Barack Obama actually won it in his first run in 2008 by 1 point against John McCain. But going back before that, it was a relatively strong Bush-era state. And then it was somewhat competitive, but always leaned Republican going back for a long time. Before that, the last time it had gone blue before 2008 was for LBJ's landslide in 1964. So, but it's basically very unlikely that any Democrat is going to win it. So it's probably going to go in that safe column, which I did change to 12 because it's a bit rounder than 11. So that is going to end up being more than a 12-point margin. If we look at the numbers here for presidential, just Indiana, 9.3 PVI. That's going to be pretty red. It's going to be around 8. That's going to be 18.6 points in a neutral environment. So that is essentially completely locked out for the Democratic presidential candidate. But of course, there's more than just that. We're going to look at the things in general. So first off, we have Donald Trump, who's relatively unpopular. Now, again, this is Donald Trump. He narrowly lost in 2020, even though he was pretty unpopular at this point in his first term at minus 14. And then Harris lost, even though Biden was still above water at this point. But Donald Trump has basically not had a positive number approval rating since March 10th. So that's definitely going to harm the Republican, especially in the case that ends up being J.D. Vance. So you can end up seeing a situation similar to what happened with Kamala Harris, where she was too tied to the Biden administration to really be able to be successful. And so, especially with these numbers here with Donald Trump, he's underwater on basically every single issue, including his most important one of immigration, which also you can see that he's very underwater in jobs in the economy, as well as inflation and prices, which now we have that being by far the most important issue. So that's definitely going to be another concern for the Trump campaign, or the Republican campaign come 2026. He's also underwater in every single demographic, including the ones that he carried which would be, white. He barely won the Hispanic male vote. Actually, I think he won the Hispanic vote by like a point. But either way, he is now much underwater with them. He is underwater with both men and women, even with people over the age of 65. So and he's not doing very well with most of his key demographics, and he's also underwater in every single state that he won in 2024 that Joe Biden had won in 2020. So you can see that it definitely does vary based on who you end up asking, but even in some states like South Dakota, he has a disapproval rating amongst all adults. But amongst 2024 voters, he's above water by 12 points. So it definitely does vary a good bit. Most adults do not approve of Donald Trump, but out of 2024 voters, you can see that he is still underwater in every single swing state that Joe Biden received at least, that would be at least 48 or so percent of the vote in. So, and that's a bit of a caveat just to include North Carolina. So that is really just the whole reason that I put that in there. He's also underwater in North Carolina, but not in Florida or any other swing states. He is underwater in all of the swing states this cycle. So, generally speaking, this is not looking very good, especially for these swing states that are likely to be relatively the same ones next time. But also some interesting, more swingy states, which could come back into the light soon, would be now New Jersey, where he's actually underwater by 21 with all adults, but 2024 voters by 11. And then we also look at Minnesota, where he's minus 14 and minus 18. Kansas, depending on how strong of a year we launch forward, I mean, it did shift a whole 5 points to the right. The nationwide popular vote shifted 5 points to the right. So if it shifts 5 points to the left, that would be within 11 points. So that could be somewhat competitive. That would be +3, but amongst adults would be -8. Somewhat similar thing in Iowa, -11 to +3. Ohio, 0.3 might go drop under very soon, but -9.2 amongst all adults. Texas, -12.5 to 0.5. So some of these more competitive states are relatively close. Idaho is by far very positive, 42.3% approval rating, even higher than Wyoming. So those are some problems. Direction of the country is doing relatively well, but it is starting to spike in the negative direction like we saw during the Biden campaign, right around the end of July going into August. So I'd expect to see this spike a bit. And so now the interesting thing about Kalshi, here we have 51-49 for the chances to win the presidential election. Very, very close right now. It is neck and neck. But here's the main problem for the Republicans, that J.D. Vance is by far leading in the chance to be the Republican nominee in 2028. And so that would come with the baggage of being with the Trump administration, which would both be positive and negative, considering that he's a very well-known figure. Marco Rubio might be a bit less tied to the campaign. If we want to go much less tied, then the best option would be Glenn Youngkin. The Democratic nominee is somewhat open, though. Gavin Newsom is currently leading with 20%, AOC with 14, Pete Buttigieg with 10, Josh Shapiro with 6, Wes Moore with 6. So, but interestingly, Kamala Harris is down at 4%. I think there's a very low chance that she will actually end up being the nominee again, like she was in 2024. Next U.S. presidential election winner, though, J.D. Vance is a large lead, but that's mostly because that his primary is basically non-competitive compared to the Democratic one. As you can see here, which party will win generally has the Democrats leading, albeit very narrowly. And who will win the House, Senate, and presidency, the most popular outcome is actually a Democratic sweep come 2028, which would mean that they win the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Now, the second closest is still a Democratic president, but then with a Democratic House and Republican Senate, and then another Democratic House scenario, but Republican Senate, Republican president. Then are the two Democratic presidents down here. Combined for the Democratic presidents in total are going to be 49, and then that's going to go up to 58, 59%. So 59% chance of a Democratic presidency according to this market. So, with all that, generally it's expected they may end up winning the election just based off of those alone. But, of course, there's a bit more nuance in it. So, let's take a look at each individual state. So again, starting off with Indiana, that's going to be a safe Republican state. Kentucky is more than going to be safe. Donald Trump won it by 30.5 in 2024. He won it by 29.8 in 2016, 26 in 2020. Now, it actually was only, quote unquote, only 23 for Romney in 2012, and was actually only 16 for McCain in 2008. But prior to that, 2015, the last time it went blue was 1996 when Clinton won it by under a percentage point. But it is not entirely red. It could potentially end up being a bit closer if the Democrats nominate someone such as their current governor, Andy Beshear. That could potentially bring the number down a bit, but probably not below a 12-point margin or so, probably below 15 at absolute best. The Democrats are going to win the state of Vermont by a large amount. It has given both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris their largest margin out of any state, 31.5 for Kamala Harris. Look down at the bottom of the list, 35.4 for Joe Biden. The only area that gave them more was Washington, D.C., which has never voted for a Republican. Next up, we have the state of Virginia. Now, Virginia is a somewhat competitive state, perennially competitive, but it did show some signs of being very, very blue in 2020 for voting for Joe Biden by 10.11%. But then it went a bit further back in 2024, voting for Kamala Harris by only 6. But even that is, I need to make that shift, but even that's actually a bit of a shift to the left, as it voted 5.65 points to the left of the nation in 2020 and 7.25 to the left in 2024. So it is still continuing to trend to the left. If this is in any of a Democratic friendly national environment, which right now, just a random ball guess, would be 3.2 points or so, which is a bit better than Hillary Clinton did, but worse than Joe Biden, then we could definitely expect that this could be over 10 points. Absolutely. Maybe not all the way up to 12, but it could, in theory, be possible. As a 5-point shift in the national popular vote, or a 4-point shift would be 9.8. Just a bit more than that would be over 10. Next up, we do have the state of South Carolina, which is probably going to be another safe state, but just barely. This one's going to border on the edge. As you can see, in 2020, Trump only won it by 11.7%. So sometimes it can get relatively close. It depends on turnout in areas like Charleston, where Joe Biden got 121,000 votes. Harris only got 111,000. That's quite a bit of a drop-off. And 6,000 more votes for Trump as well didn't help anything. 5.7 compared to 12.9. You can also see all across the rest of the state, a lot of those counties got a lot redder. And so with that, we can also see that that's really an interesting state to watch, but it did go all the way up to 18 points. It's relatively stagnant comparative to the national popular vote, though 16.14 to 16.39, and it has stayed somewhere in there with the exception of 2012, where it was only at 14.33 to the right of the nation. It has stayed right around 16.25 continually for a long time. So it is basically a perfect bellwether state, shifted 16 points to the right. So actually watch South Carolina. So then also we're going to be looking at the state of Georgia. This is going to be a key swing state going into 2028. It has been a swing state. It was, in theory, a swing state going into 2016. It wasn't really in 2012 and 2016. It was theorized that Clinton could have won it. But then she ended up losing it by 5.1%. Joe Biden went for it and managed to narrowly flip it by just under 1/4 percentage point, the narrowest state by margin in the entire country. And then Donald Trump flipped it back by 2.2%. However, that is still actually a trend to the left, relatively narrow. Actually, not very narrow. A whole 3.5-point shift to the left in comparison to the country. So much so that now the PVI is only 0.1. So, It could end up being somewhat blue on the map. Of course, it's not going to be able to shift as hard as it could because swing states are always more competitive than the rest of the nation as a whole. But it could end up definitely flipping, and this is actually potentially going to be the bluest of any of the true swing states, other than if you want to include New Jersey, for 2028 for a Democrat. So this is going to be the easiest pickup opportunity. It's going to be probably under 2 points, but in a really good year, it definitely could end up being. So now what I did, it could end up being just a bit over 2 points, which is right about how much Trump won it by. So it'd be probably roughly a mirrored margin on a relatively good year for a Democrat. And then we move on to the 7:30 p.m. poll closing time. We have Ohio, West Virginia, and North Carolina. West Virginia is one of the safest red states in the entire country. It actually moved up to second place after in no, it actually still was second place, and it has given Donald Trump his second highest margin of any state. It voted for him by 42 points in 2024, but it actually is a bit less than it did in 2016. So it is slightly trending to the left, but it's not even close to anything where it would be at all competitive. It shifted to the left by 3 points compared to the nation, but again, that's really not going to do much. Its PVI is still extremely high at 21.1, and it is still going to safely go in the Republican column. Ohio, Donald Trump appeared to have a bit of a unique appeal here, but it still wouldn't be expected that a Republican now would lose it. Barack Obama won it both times in 2008 and 2012 by just under 5 in 2008 and in 3 points in 2012, but then Donald Trump moved it by 11 points to the right in 2016, won it by 8 in 2020, and then got it all the way up to 11.2 in 2024, which was a bit of a shift to the left, but most states did because of how much California moved. But it went from 12.5 to 9.75 to the right of the nation, which is still enough to have it be likely on this map, which is going to be just under 12 points, probably going to be just under 10 as well. But on a really good year, or on a very strong right candidate like Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, I could definitely see this state dropping down below 8 points, and maybe in a really good year dropping below 5, but it wouldn't get anywhere necessarily close to competitive on any modern cycle. But as of right now, because we don't really know who the candidate is, and that Gavin Newsom isn't necessarily a ridiculously strong candidate in those Rust Belt regions, working class voters, he's more of just a general Democratic turnout sort of politician, and he's currently leading, not by much, but currently leading. I will leave it in the 8 to 12 point range. Next, you have North Carolina. This is another state that is a great flip opportunity, again, for the Democrats. It's taken a long time, but it's slowly been trending to the left. Its PVI is only 0.9 now, which is actually still the furthest to the right of any of the swing states other than Arizona and other than Nevada and Arizona in that order. But it is still under 1. It should be 1.8, which means it should be 1.8 points in a neutral national environment. And it has been trending to the left quite a bit. As you can see, almost 2 points per cycle compared to the nation. So that is definitely going to help Democrats here, basically, to say the least. And so that should help benefit them in a lot of ways come 2028. With diversifying regions across the state, we're going to have to watch the 2026 Senate seat now. That's going to be a large indicator, but this could definitely end up flipping for the first time back since 2008. Barack Obama won it by a large black turnout in some areas and some counties that hadn't gone blue in forever. Wake County is the largest county in the state, and now it is a Democratic stronghold. But it actually went red for Bush both times in 2000 2004. Barack Obama flipped it, and it has gone Democratic by more than 10 points, and recently by over 25 in all over 20 points all 3 times against Trump since then. So it is going to be an interesting state to watch. He managed to get enough of the white vote in 2008 in order to flip the state, but it's definitely going to have to be an interesting state to watch. And Kamala Harris only fell 3.2 points short in the state. An interesting thing to watch here, real quick, is going to be just quickly duplicating this and then shifting it by the national popular vote margin. So what we're going to do here is this is what the states would look like if the national popular vote was perfectly even. So this helps us see a little bit that Pennsylvania voted a quarter point to the right of the nation. North Carolina and Georgia voted 1.7 points and 0.72 points to the right of the nation in 2024. That's compared, of course, to relatively larger numbers recently. So again, going back to that trend. If that trend continues, North Carolina will barely vote to the right of the nation come 2028. Next, you have the 8 p.m. poll closing time. This is the largest one in the entire country. Starting off with the safe states. We have Massachusetts, Maryland for the Democrats, and then for the Republicans, we have Tennessee, Alabama, Oklahoma, Missouri. There's a bit of an asterisk to that. And then we also have for the Democrats, we have Maine's 1st Congressional District. Now, there's quite a few states for the Democrats that are likely to go just over 10 points, but I'm not confident enough they'd go above 12 to be able to safely put them in this column, especially based on how things went for 2024. But based on that 15, I will put Delaware in this column as well, Rhode Island and Connecticut with a slight asterisk there that could end up doing worse. But as of right now, it does appear that they will end up going in the blue column by enough to be able to say they will go by just over 12 points. Mississippi is another one, 16.5 points. In theory, it could go a bit under 12 if there's a strong enough candidate that can get enough of the black vote. Capitalize on that as well. Potentially someone like AOC could do a bit better in these areas, but Pete Buttigieg would almost certainly end up leaving this state behind, for example. Then you end up having states like Missouri. Again, going back to Missouri, it was it was a swing state for a while. It had gone back and forth, going with the presidential winner until 2008 when McCain won it by 0.13, and then it shifted very hard to the right. Donald Trump then won it by 18.6 in 2016, won it by 15.5 in 2020, and then 18.5 in 2024. That's still a slight leftward trend. I mean, in general, the weighted trend is still 0.34, but it shifted 3 points to the left. And if you end up getting a strong enough messenger on the Democratic side, it could potentially end up going under 12 points. But that would be a complete maximizing of this area as well. That would be a strong Midwest appeal. But most likely it will be over 12 at the end of the day. Most likely, Illinois will end up going by over 12 just based off of the expected national environment. It will end up doing relatively well. D.C. will definitely be over 12. There is not a single Democrat that has won D.C. by less than 12 percentage points. And actually, the worst margin, I believe, was actually, might have actually been Carter by 61.5, which actually is surprisingly, yes, worse than Mondale did in 1984. Carter lost a bit of the vote due to contest with, actually did relatively poorly against Reagan Anderson. So 1980 would have been the worst one, 61.5 point margin. So DC will go blue, period. New Jersey is going to be relatively close. This is going to be an interesting one. New Hampshire, but to start off up in the northeastern corner and go down, we'll start in Maine. Maine's 2nd district has somewhat of a unique appeal for Donald Trump. It's not entirely red, though, as we've had a Democrat, Jared Golden, has held on to that seat since 2018. He won re-election in 2020 by 6.1, held on by 6.1 again in 2022, narrowly won re-election in 2024. He has said that he is running for re-election, but on the presidential level, currently we are looking at 4.5 PVI, so that's likely going to end up going not by a strong amount, but somewhere probably by 5 to 8 points. Depends on if the Democrats choose someone like Andy Beshear could do relatively well here because it's a bit more of a rural area like he had to appeal in order to win in the state of Kentucky. Statewide in Maine would likely go by 5 to 8 points. Joe Biden won it by 9, so actually probably more than 8 points. Not by that much, though, but with expected somewhere around 5 to 8 in the 2nd district, that would probably end up being the expected result there. Moving down to New Hampshire, it's actually a blue trending state. They like the Republican candidates on the statewide level as they have Republican trifecta, but on the national level, they haven't voted for a Republican senator in decades, and they also haven't voted red in a presidential election since 2000. They are the only state that voted for Bush in 2000, that then voted for Kerry in 2004. The other 2 states that flipped voted for Bush in 2004. And then both of them actually flipped for Barack Obama by over 9.5 points in 2008. But looking at New Hampshire, Harris won it by 2.8. Clinton only won it by a third of a point, but Biden won it by 7.5, which is actually the highest margin since 2008. So it has been a relatively blue state. It's been swinging a good bit. PVI of 2. Plus 3.2 would mean 7.2 point margin. So on a generic year versus for a generic Democrat, I expect this might end up going as high as 8, but probably a bit less than that, probably around 7 points. New Jersey shifted very hard to the right, and it is actually the 2nd highest shift to the right in the entire country. And that alone actually moved its trend line all the way to the right. It went from 11.5 points to the left of the nation to 7.4, and the only state that moved more to the right from that is the state of New York. So that's a huge trend. It shifted almost, it shifted 9.98 points, 10.01 points to the right, second only to New York. And so that really is going to harm the chances that the Democrats have of being able to hold on as a stronghold. But luckily for the Democrats, most of it was actually a loss in turnout. So you can see here, for example, in Hudson County, which actually is the one of the largest counties. The largest one's actually Essex County. If you look at Essex County, 224,000 votes for Harris. Biden got 266,000. Trump got 75,000. He got 83,000. It's much more a drop-off for Harris than anything else. Bergen, 285,000 for Biden, 232,000 for Harris, compared to 204,000 for Trump, 217,000. So it's actually more a drop in votes for Harris because of a lack of turnout than an actual really hard trend towards the right. There absolutely is a trend towards the right in New Jersey. It's just it was an issue of turnout more so than that rightward trend, which is a good sign for any candidate going into 2028, which means that you could potentially see this state going by 5 to 8 points on a relatively poor night, but on a better night, you could definitely see it by going almost 10 points, which is still relatively poor considering that even Hillary Clinton won it by 14.1% in 2016. But compared to the 6-point margin in 2024, the Democrats will probably take anything they can get. And then we go down to the state of Florida, a relatively competitive state in 2016, one of a few states to actually improve Trump's margin from 2020, and then went to 13 points in 2024. This could potentially be just over 12 or just under, and it depends on how well the appeal is. J.D. Vance does relatively well in the state. Donald Trump is only -4, but he's actually at +4.5 for 2024 voters. It depends on how hard the state continues to trend to the right, which has been doing very strongly so, but it could end up being by just around a 12-point margin. Then we get to Pennsylvania. This is another key swing state, has been trending towards the right. Not a huge amount, and actually recently it's been trending a bit towards the left. I don't mean to do that. So the average weighted result is actually literally 1/100th of a percentage point to the Democrats. But it went from 3.3 to the right of the nation in 2020 to a 1/4 of a point to the right of the nation in 2024. So this is actually a bit more of a bellwether state now. So if the Democrats do end up doing relatively well in the popular vote, then they could easily win this state by just around the same margin as Georgia. It depends if they end up nominating Josh Shapiro, it could end up going by more than 5. But if they end up doing someone very poor in this area, which I guess would probably be someone more on the likes of potentially, depending on how things go, J.B. Pritzker could be more of a focus on the Midwest more than this region. Pennsylvania might end up being a bit closer, or potentially even narrowly going Republican for a second cycle in a row, which hasn't happened going all the way back to 1988 and 1984. Next, we have the 9 p.m. or sorry, the 8:30 p.m. poll closing time is just Arkansas, a very Republican state, 30.5-point margin, 2024. Next, we have the 9 p.m. poll closing time. New York will be more than 12 points. Now, it was relatively close, just barely over 12 for Kamala Harris in 2024. But as we've seen, the Democrats are seemingly able to get some of their turnout back, as I don't have any pages up for it right now. I will as I am talking. There's Zohran Mamdani got the highest amount of primary votes of any candidate in New York City. And so, based on that, he did also end up, he did get a lot of turnout back that Kamala Harris lost going into, that would be very, very critical for the Democrats going into 2026. Here we have the page for the general election, the Democratic primary. He did win with 56% of the votes here, and he actually was in a majority of ballots. He was ranked in a majority of ballots, and he overperformed expectations quite a bit. He ended up winning the first round as well, and that was when a lot of commentators started calling it. We were one of the few predictors that actually predicted that Zohran would win the primary in the first place. But that's another thing, was a lot of lost turnout. It was actually a bit of a shift in the black vote as well, where Biden got 703,000 votes. Kamala Harris lost an entire 100,000 votes in Kings County, for example. In Queens, 569,000 to 437,000. Trump got 264,000 from 212,000. So there was definitely a bit of a shift. But as we've also seen on the approval ratings, the black electorate is definitely having a very large disapproval rating of Trump, so that could potentially harm him as well. So that's definitely going to potentially end up making that be above 12 points. It's definitely going to be a bit more competitive than it would have been even in 2016 when Hillary Clinton won it by 22.6. It would probably be closer to about 15 points, but still enough to make that state solid blue. Next, we're going to go over to the other Republican safe states: North South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, 3rd District, and Louisiana. And then for the Democrats, we actually do have the state of Colorado being safe now. Kamala Harris won it by 11, compared to Hillary Clinton, who actually did 3 points better in the popular vote. She only won Colorado by 5. So it is a very left-trending state, the most left-trending in the entire country, if we sort this, other than 2 districts in Nebraska, and then Utah is a bit messed up because of how they seem to be relatively anti-MAGA, and also that shift from voting for Romney, who is from Utah. It is the most left-trending state in the entire country, and so that will definitely end up helping benefit the Democrats come 2028, as this will likely be a safe blue state. And also, it's a place where a lot of college-educated white people move to, and that is one of the few demographics that shifted towards Kamala Harris from Joe Biden, as white college-educated voters. Next, we have the state of Nebraska. The state of Nebraska statewide will likely go by just over 12, actually probably be closer to just over 15, probably around 16 points. Expect a relatively large leftward trend in some of these educated regions as well. Nebraska's 1st district will go under 12 points, definitely potentially under 10, but that will be a likely margin either way. The 2nd district will likely be potentially be just over 8 points. Just because, I mean, to look at the fact that Biden won it by 6.5, it's a very left trending district. It's actually, as we saw, the second most. Okay, the second most left trending district. These Yeah, the most left trending region in the entire country, actually. So that's definitely going to be something that's going to benefit for the Democrats there. Next, we have the state of New Mexico, which is probably going to go closer to about 6 points or so, as non-college educated Hispanics are moving towards the right. So the Hispanic electorate is definitely going to move more towards the Republicans. That could definitely end up harming the Democrats. The white population in New Mexico did actually move towards the left. But Kamala Harris did win it by 6 points after Joe Biden won it by almost 11. So that's definitely going to harm things there. The PVI in New Mexico is 3.6. Next, we're going to be looking at Kansas. This is an interesting one. Donald Trump won it by 16 after he won it by 14 and a half in 2020. This could potentially be right around 12 points in a good environment. It's a left trending state. There's a getting more educated. And so that is going to be an interesting one to watch. It's right up here, all the way up at only behind Georgia and Colorado for states, 3.21 for that weighted trend. Washington's actually next, and then Alaska. That's going to be an interesting one to watch as well. Minnesota is going to be another one that's going to be interesting, probably right around 5 to 8 points. If you end up getting someone like Tim Walz, it would definitely end up being a much stronger margin, probably closer to about 10 points. But as of right now, it has definitely gotten bluer, as Clinton won the popular vote by 2 points, and then she only won it by 1.5, which actually means that it voted to the right of the nation. But then in 2024, it voted about 5 points to the left of the nation, as you can look here, 5.7 to be exact. So it's probably going to end up going by maybe up to 8 points or so, and maybe up to 10 if Tim Walz were to win the nomination there. It's not very left trending, but 1.55 points to the left. Next up, we have the state of Texas. This one definitely disappointed Democrats by shifting very hard to the right. It voted 12.2 points to the right of the country after having voted quite a bit more to the left. It had been trending to the left. It was only 10.04 points to the right of the country in 2020, and then shifted 2 points to the right in respect to the nation in 2024, which is going to take a lot to come back. It is still left trending a little bit, and the PVI is 5.9 right now. But that means they would still vote just over 12 points in basically a neutral environment, which means it would probably be just under, right around 10 points or so, maybe a bit less on a good year for the Democrats. Next up, we have the state of Iowa. This is once a relatively competitive state. Barack Obama won it by 9.5 in 2008, 5.8 in 2012, and then Donald Trump won it by 9.5 in 2016, 8.25 in 2020, and then all the way up to 13.25 in 2024, the largest such margin in decades, going back past Reagan, all the way back to Nixon's landslide in 1972. So this is a pretty difficult hill to get up, and it does not appear that by any means, unless you end up getting someone like Rob Sand, which is not even on here for a list, on picked here, then you could end up potentially getting it a bit lower. But he's even running for governor, I think, right now. I don't remember which two of those races he's running for, but he's literally the only Democrat that has won statewide since 2020, and potentially going back to 2016. I don't exactly remember. So it's been very, very difficult for Democrats. I expect that this will probably end up joining Ohio, as they are generally now, actually, interestingly enough, relatively similar, even though Ohio is a bit more urban. There still is enough rurals out there that it kind of ends up balancing out with Iowa. Unless we have also a target in the Midwest as well. Someone like J.B. Pritzker may do a bit better there. Next up, we have the state of Arizona. This one is the most Republican-leaning of the main swing states. even ahead of Nevada. It is left trending in general, 2.03 points to the left for the weighted trend here. And so we can look and see that it was 4 points to the right of the nation, 4.16 to the right of the nation in 2020. It shifted a little bit to the left in respect to the nation. So it's probably not going to be very competitive here. If they underperform Joe Biden basically at all, they will end up losing Arizona. So he only won it by a third of a point. So that means that most likely the Democrat will end up losing Arizona, potentially by a bit more than that. J.D. Vance is doing relatively well with the Hispanic vote. The white vote isn't necessarily moving as much in Arizona as was originally expected, so that may end up being by just over 2 points or so for J.D. Vance come 2028. Next up, we have the state of Michigan, the closest state in the election in 2016, the bluest out of all of the swing states in 2020, and then right in the middle of the pack of the trio in 2024. It's the most favorable for the Democrats, though, with a PVI of 0.3. Actually, no, Wisconsin's better with 0.1. It's now right in the middle of the pack there. Pennsylvania is a bit worse with 0.4. But obviously, in this scenario, they would end up picking off Michigan. Joe Biden did win it by 2.8 percentage points in 2020, which is relatively impressive considering the fact that, but also relatively disappointing considering that in 2012, Obama won it by 9.5. Just looking at the difference in the county map, you can see a stark difference where Donald Trump definitely does a lot better than basically any other Republican, especially McCain, of running up the numbers in the rurals. But he did end up getting a lot of numbers in Detroit that Kamala Harris just didn't pull. But if you end up getting a strong Democrat in there, Gretchen Whitmer would easily win this state potentially by definitely by over 4 or over 2, potentially over 5 in a really good year. Then you go to Wisconsin, another strong state, definitely going to go continue going on its trend of going by under a percentage point. It hasn't gone by over a percentage point except for Obama going all the way back to 1996. So Obama is the exception to that rule. But all three of them have voted together since 1992, so it'd be weird for them to go separate. But those three would secure the presidency for the Democrats, even if they did lose these two, because Hawaii is also safe. But we will be getting to those in a bit. But Wisconsin is going to be the reddest again, just because it generally doesn't tend to go one way or the other. It appears that it just has a very active turnout base for both parties. Milwaukee, Kamala Harris didn't do much worse. She only lost 1,000 votes. Donald Trump gained 4,000 votes. He did better in Racine and Kenosha, as well as some of these other counties. I did not mean to click that. These other counties around the Bay Area, but then she also improved in some regions. She actually, I think, did a little bit better. She actually gained 13,000 votes in Dane County, which is where Madison is. And Trump also gained a bit more, so she did have less of a benefit. Actually, no, she gained 6,000 vote benefit in Dane County, and actually she did lose a bit of percentage because Trump's gained votes were a larger percentage of how much he had in 2020 than Kamala Harris's were in 2024. But Door County moved to the left, and some other counties did also move to the left. But generally has a relatively high turnout rate for both parties, no matter who ends up winning. It's generally based on the independents. Then we go to Utah and Montana, which are going to be safe Republican states. Montana was competitive as recently as 2008. It was expected to potentially be competitive in 2020, and then Trump won it by 16.5. In 2020, Trump just narrowly missed 20 points, which he did hit in 2016, which means it is a bit left trending, but not by much. 0.08, because it actually has trended more towards the right from 10 to 17.5 to 22.5, and then only to 20 and to 18.5. So But actually, interesting, it does have slightly favorable demographics, but that is weighted relatively poorly. That's just basically just because it's relatively not that white and also but a bit less college educated. Um, so that's going to be a safe state for the Republicans. Nevada is going to be another one that most likely J.D. Vance would be able to hold on to, potentially by less than 2 points. Trump won it by 3.1, which is actually Trump won it. That was actually his fifth smallest performance, actually after Georgia, and barely behind North Carolina. It was almost only behind Arizona, where there's going to be a lot more shifts in Clark County. Biden won it by 9.5. Clinton won it by 10. Biden performed better everywhere else in the state, but did worse in Clark County, and Clark County is continuing to move towards the right. I expect that actually, even though a Democrat would do better, J.D. Vance would probably flip Clark County in 2028. And so that would likely end up sealing the fate there. Going to 11 p.m., Idaho, California, Oregon, and Washington would all be more than 12 points, as they all were in 2024. And in this better environment, they would probably all do the same. Winning the popular vote, California would be 22.4 points for Democrats. Oregon, in a neutral environment, would be that would be 15.8, and then Washington, the state, would be 20. So all of those would be better, obviously, than Kamala Harris did. Especially whoever the Democratic nominee ends up being would probably end up being able to flip back some of these counties, especially these big ones like San Bernardino, Riverside, and some other ones around these large populated regions, but might end up continuing to make losses in Los Angeles. This is really where the game was lost here. 2.4 million votes for Kamala Harris compared to 3 million in for Joe Biden. That is a 600,000 vote loss. That is basically where the entire national popular vote got lost for Kamala Harris, was in Los Angeles County alone, where more people live than all but the top 10 most populous states, in order being California, Texas, Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan. Every single other state has less people than Los Angeles County. Next, we have the state of Ohio. Wow. Okay, neither of those. Hawaii. Um, Hawaii, Harris only won it by 23 after Biden won it by 29. Clinton won it by 32. Obama won it by 42 and 45. This was the highest margin for a Democrat in its entire time in the Union. It has voted for a Republican twice. In 1972 for Nixon's landslide, and then in 84 for Reagan's. And every single time other than that, it has voted for a Democrat. It peaked again in 2008, and then since then has been trending towards the right. If we look at the trend line for Hawaii, 3.12 points, which is actually the highest in the entire country, but it will likely not be able to move enough to cancel out that 23-point lead. It will probably end up going by around 20 points, even in a good year, for that reason alone. And then with Alaska 10.1, in a good year, it might actually end up being right around 8 points for a Republican, which means that J.D. Vance would probably win it in this situation. But at this point, it would probably still go Republican, as that's an 11-point margin with an even national popular vote. 3-point win would be down to 8. So, Trump won it recently in 2024 by 13.1, which means that it voted 11.7 points to the right of the nation, which basically goes with R plus 11 being that adjusted PVI. So, with all of that, here's our map. 302 for the Democrats, 236 for the Republicans. That would be trading off Arizona and Nevada for North Carolina compared to the 2020 map. But anything obviously is still possible. We still have 3 and an odd few weeks left before the 2028 election. So basically anything is possible. So thank you all so much for watching today's video. Make sure to subscribe down below if you are not already. Follow me on all of the platforms and have a fantastic rest of your day.